For those of you who make the smart choice not to follow me on Twitter, my name's Alyssa Longmuir. I'm one of the co-founders of Even Strength, as well as the lead analyst for the Australian Women's Ice Hockey League. Generally, I can be found yelling about either women's hockey analytics and data, STEM education, or Australian hockey on my Twitter, because in this house, we support wide and varied interests. So before we begin, let's just get a couple of things out of the way. Yes, I am Australian, but this is the only time you will literally ever hear me say g'day. They're called prawns, not shrimp, and also Vegemite is gross, and I will not perpetuate the myth that it's not. Now we have that covered, let's actually get started. In the past 18 months, I've worked a lot in this area I've decided to call Fringe sports analytics, which feels a lot like that stats drill tweet that everyone on my timeline laughed at, while I looked sadly at the literal tree I've killed in the past year trying to collect my own data. The fact is, at each and every NHL game sits up to 20 scorekeepers who record the details of every event that happens on the ice, from line changes to hit, shot types and location. If it happens, it's tagged, plugged into the NHL hit system, from which sites that so many people go to daily for their analysis, evolving hockey, ineffective math, natural stat trick, etc. Then proceed to scrape for the greater good. I wish things were that easy. However, before we really get into hockey, I think it's only fair to first look at women's sports analytics in a wider context. Despite the fact it's probably not going to shock anyone to find out that we are woefully behind mainstream men's sports in literally every way that matters when it comes to this area of competition. In 2015, Alison McCann, who was then with 538 and is now with the New York Times, wrote, "Men's sports have awesome data." This was in response to Nate Silver's piece in ESPN magazine, in which he marveled at the amount of publicly available data made accessible through sites like Baseball Reference. In 2016, Sue Bird wrote, "Analyze this," for the Players Tribune, in an effort to kind of bring to light the ongoing disparity in stats between the NBA and the WNBA. In particular, she highlighted Alina Del Don, who now plays for the Washington Mystics, saying that last season, Alina Del Don had a record-setting season, one of the highest PERs ever among WNBA and NBA players. It was one of the best seasons ever by a female athlete. But few sports fans outside the WNBA even knew it was happening until it had already happened. The same thing happened literally just this past week as she joined the 50-40-90 club as only the 9th player in history and the first ever from the WNBA to do so. And still there was crickets until it actually happened. The fact is, in many cases, there's data out there, be it on independently run sites that have either scraped, added, or straight up tracked by hand, what so many who work in mainstream men's sports take for granted. Sites like Her Hoops have been instrumental in changing the face of women's basketball at a college and professional level in just the past 2 years. Launched 16 years after 82 games kickstarted the NBA's grassroots statistical revolution, Her Hoops has been widely praised from college coaches, the media, and members of WNBA front offices alike. Similarly, in 2018, StatsBomb released data for 4 separate women's soccer leagues, including the NWSL, and this season have gone on to give every single FAWSL team completely free access to their analytics platform, StatsBomb IQ. On top of that, and possibly more importantly, StatsBomb released data for the Women's World Cup on a daily basis for free. For a whole month, between June 7th and July 7th, I had data visualizations akin to anything I've ever seen from men's sports on my dashboard every day. And obviously, I'd seen visualizations for women's sports happen before, but this was the first time it had really taken on a larger scale. And it was really the first time I'd seen it be constant and consistent analysis of a major women's sporting event. Even the Pyeongchang Olympics and the lack of NHL players couldn't really make the wider hockey analytics community lift a finger when there was no one willing to cough up the play-by-play data and an NHL season was still rolling by. It was very much deemed too hard. not a lot was done. And I'm the first person to put my hand up and say I personally did not do enough during those Olympics, particularly when it comes to stats, and particularly when you consider it was the first ever time we've had actual shot data for a women's international competition. In a year that has seen so many I've lost my spot. In a year that's seen so many professional teams commit to analytics, with 59 individuals currently working in listed roles across the NHL, 107 in the NBA, and 9 in the MLS. That's 175 individuals currently working in data analytics for North American professional men's sports teams before we even touch the MLB, which goodness knows how many have that working there because of Moneyball. In all of women's professional sport, there is just one. So let's take a step back and look at this for hockey specifically. Like, where did we come from? Where are we going? What sort of launch trajectory are we on? And is this entire thing going to blow up in our faces? Now, bear with me, because I almost am certainly about to get something in this next section wrong. But in my defense, everything regarding it is A, poorly documented, and B, hidden 25 Google pages deep. So, a brief history of NHL tracking data by someone who really should not be speaking about it. If we go all the way back to the very beginning of NHL statistical data, we find ourselves on a Wednesday, specifically December 1997. Not 1997, gosh, I've jumped forward 1,000 years, 1917. And there we have the first ever box scores recorded in the NHL system. At that point in time, all that was being recorded was goals, assists, points, and penalty minutes. Times of major events were added in the 22-23 season, while it wasn't until the 59-60 season that we saw the introduction of individual shot counts. Oh, to be in the 60s. In 67-80, we saw the introduction of plus minus to the official score sheet, and while many people may loathe to admit it, we can possibly call that the beginning of advanced statistics. In the 71-72 season, data was digitized for the first time using a keyboard punch operator and a long distance dial-up. And then in the 84-85 season, the system would be introduced that would come to be known as the RTSS, or hit system. So when the NHL introduced this computerized statistics system in the 80s, and then in 1997, they introduced the team of trackers at each arena that would really help usher the NHL into an analytical age, with shot locations being available from 2005, 2006, or 2008, 2009, or 2010, 2011, if we are talking solid and consistent data. From there, you know the stories. The rise of the analytics and the bloggers. Heck, a decent number of you probably lived through it, contributed to it, and can probably list at least 5 people who got hired by NHL teams because of it. These days, when you scrape an NHL game, you're looking at being able to calculate literally hundreds, if not thousands, of metrics based on the provided data. Evolving Wild have about 80 standard stats that they can compile from any game, and another 50 that can be made of those. The NHL website itself shows 14 standard player stats per game, 16 when you look at it across the space of a season, and a further 79 when you add the SAP advanced metrics, for a grand total of 95, and still none of those are shot location. If we're considering the NHL data as the gold standard, which, let me be clear, at this point in time, prior to any league having a full season of puck tracking data, because both Finland and Russia have decided to announce things in the past 24 hours that made this irrelevant, I am still considering the NHL gold standard here. Then how far behind are our second tier leagues, and even more so, what type of jump are we talking when we talk about data in fringe leagues and making those analytically viable places? Now, for a brief story time. Most of you, I'm assuming, have been to IKEA at least once in your life. The land of flat packs, and largely responsible for the furnishing of bedrooms of 16 to 29-year-olds everywhere. I moved at the beginning of this year out of a share house which I'd been living in with a collection of strangers in Bondi since I'd first moved to Sydney, into a 2-bedroom apartment with my best friend. We now have 3 side tables, 13 plants, a colour-coded jersey rack that we have the audacity to call interior decorating, and an absurdly large amount of furniture that we had to build ourselves. This is to say, I am very familiar with a flat pack, from the TV cabinet that I had to go back to IKEA twice for. Once because I forgot to buy hinges for the doors, and the second time because I stripped the screws on those hinges. A daybed that literally came with several pieces of wood being slightly too long, and I had to file them back using whatever that thing was. And a chair that just straight up didn't have the correct number of bolts. I am now somewhat of an expert. Trying to use any type of advanced stat in a Fringe league is something akin to this situation. You rock up at IKEA, ready to go for the day, and you push your lovely little shopping trolley through your local NHL Advanced Stats website, looking at all of the fun things with names you don't understand until you find the one. And it's going to be so good. You're excited, you're going to be able to illustrate your point perfectly, so you grab all the parts you need from downstairs, you grab some meatballs to go, and you hightail it home. The instructions are kind of funky, but that's okay, and seem to require some translation, but that's okay because you're lucky there was a fully written write-up of your desired metric on the internet to begin with. It doesn't matter if 2 of the links are broken. However, when you go to actually unpack everything, there are 3 screws, 5 washers, one of those funny wooden dowel things, and a whole leg just straight up missing from the box because apparently those aren't in stock in your store. Now, it's kind of a funny mental image trying to picture someone making this table, right? All those missing parts, the instructions that you can only half read, and also a deadline of a family dinner, cough cough, the start of a new season, breathing down their neck. And as this imaginary person struggles to make their purchase into something that vaguely resembles a table, it's supposed to be kind of funny, right? Yeah, it's not. To get an idea of what you're working with, I want you to just have a look at the list on the screen now. So this is a summary of a bunch of, I guess, commonly known NHL stats. Now these are the ones that are still accessible in the AHL and the NWHL and the, bless their soul, late CWHL. And the AWIHL, and the AIHL. Now you understand what I mean by 3 missing screws, 5 washers, one of those funny wooden dowel things, and a whole leg. In the past 18 months, women's hockey has grown exponentially in terms of what we've accomplished. Personally, the launch of Even Strength and the tracking, integration, and use of the AWIHL data throughout season's broadcasts were a particular high point for me. Additionally, work by people like Mike Murphy, who presented here at RITSAC last year, and Colleen Markley, who is presenting later today, have done wonders to move things forward in the public sphere. However, analytics and data when it comes to women's hockey is still very much in its infancy. That's not to say that there is nothing being done, just that 12 months ago, information like shot location was but a hope and a dream for members of the women's hockey community. Now, 12 months later, we have complete shot data sets for 3 seasons of the NWHL and 1 of the AWIHL. Of course, those data sets didn't come without trial. The most recent season of the NWHL saw 91 goals fail to have the players on the ice recorded. And in a league where statistics are already something of a finite resource, the loss of just this one piece of information sent shockwaves that knocked out several more metrics, including plus minus and e-time on ice, unable to be calculated until those 91 goals were correctly logged. I finished that half an hour ago. For the Australian League, I hand-tracked over 1,800 events while doing colour commentary for each and every game throughout the season. If anyone ever asks you to do that, I would like to recommend not doing it. But then for finals, we decided to step things up a notch. live tracking and digitizing events throughout the game to produce live and up-to-date graphics every intermission. Without meaning to, the AWIHL had suddenly become the most statistically advanced hockey broadcast in women's hockey, at least, surpassing even what we've seen from the Olympics in terms of what data was made available to the viewer at home without them ever having to change screens. It was also a first for women's hockey with Australian hockey as far as statistically relevant analysis went. And if I do say so myself, those graphics look really nice, considering at the end, from data import to image export, I had it down to about a 3-minute turnaround. As we get more and more data, we're also starting to be able to see more trends developing. We can see clearly how leagues have changed from year to year, particularly in regards to the influence of centralization and the Olympics, demonstrating the difference between leagues in more than just equivalency ratio, instead looking at differences in high danger shooting area between leagues, countries and genders, drawing to light the play differences that are developed due to rule discrepancies when we look at the men's, women's and international games. The issue is, as far as we go, the issue so far is that as we go as sports go, stats, data and analytics have taken a backseat to growing the game, to improving visibility, to the hypothetical future we are all supposed to be striving for. There's quite simply bigger fish to fry for commissioners than a group of maybe 5 people on the internet who really want shift data. There's 2 main issues here. One being that when it now becomes the responsibility of the individual to make sure goals are assigned correctly. No, I'm not kidding. To make sure all data is accounted for. Those 91 goals of missing metrics, folks. Mike Murphy spent goodness knows how long looking at NWHL game tape to make sure all of the assists on goals were being assigned correctly this season. I trained literally one person on every AWIHL team to send me a copy of the game sheet after the game because I didn't know when that was going to be uploaded to the internet. And I have seen people had to send emails because empty net goals were not credited to the correct person in championship games. So the second idea is this idea that accurate stats, accessible data, and any type of analytics aren't worth it. And for those who think that, well, you're doing yourself, your league, and your players a massive disservice. So what's next? What's the point of me, I guess, standing up here, yelling for 20 minutes about this? At CHAC earlier this year, Colleen put up a PowerPoint slide that listed the names of everyone who had published anything on women's hockey in the past 12 months. There were 6 names of them on the slide, and 2 of them were technically me, if you count Even Strength as a separate entity. At the time, I tweeted about how disappointed I was that we could have come so far on the back of just so few individuals, and yet we could all still fit on one slide. So here's my challenge. In the next 12 months, produce something for women's hockey. Those 2 completed data sets I talked about earlier will be pinned to my Twitter, and there's a QR link for them at the end of the presentation. Make something, anything. Some of the brightest names in sports analytics, data and visualization are in this room. I'm not asking you to reinvent the wheel. I'm asking you to try and build an IKEA table with a missing leg and 3 less screws than required. And if you can't do that, amplify voices. Follow the people who are doing it. Not just in women's hockey or women's sports, but in the European leagues, in junior leagues, be it the local college scene or NCAA or U Sports. It's not an easy ride, clawing and scratching and fighting every step of the way. But when you're fighting for visibility or even for some semblance of equality, when is it not going to be? So on the slide at the moment, there's a bunch of really great women's basketball follows in regards to statistics and data. Here are some people I would recommend just in fringe sports in general, be it really good data for European leagues or soccer are the middle 2, and then baseball obviously at the bottom. They just released a bunch of women's baseball data for the first time ever, which is kind of cool. And also then hockey. We still only just fit on one slide, and I would love for that to change. But thank you for having me, and that is it from me. Oh wait, the data. There's the QR link to data. Sleeping. Thank you for having me.